Welcome to the very first episode of the Browns Nation Station. I'm your host, Mark Bergin, and I'm really excited to be joined today by Ali Hysong. She is the host of the Here We Go Brownies podcast. Ali, you are the very first guest on the Browns Nation Station. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Mark. I'm just so happy to be here. Like I just told you, I'm excited to talk Browns anytime, anywhere.
And the Browns are set to kick off the 2020 season on the road against the Baltimore Ravens. That game will be at 1 o'clock Eastern time on Sunday. And Ali, I've got to ask you to start out, is there any part of you that will miss former Browns head coach Freddie Kitchens?
0%. Not a chance. Not at all. And I'll tell you why. I was all aboard the Freddie Kitchens train. I was all aboard the John Dorsey train when it was coming through Cleveland. Now that it's gone, I'm not looking back. I'm excited to see, a lot of alignment in Cleveland for the first time in what seems like forever. You've got the front office, you've got the coaching staff, and you've got the personnel groups all working towards the same common goal. And I think that this offensive scheme and Joe Wood's defensive scheme is just really going to bring out the best in this roster. So I'm just really excited, but no, I'm not going to miss the previous regime at all.
And, it's like from a pure comedy standpoint, you had the Pittsburgh started it t-shirt, you had OBJ and Jarvis cussing him out on the sidelines. You had running the ball on 4th and 9. And, of course, the infamous false start penalty, 4th and 11 against the Patriots, and then putting his offense back out on the field on 4th and 16. That was ineptitude at any level of football, whether you want to go from Pop Warner all the way to the NFL.
I could do a better job, I think. And like I said, don't get me wrong. I was all aboard the Freddie Kitchens train, especially if you look back at the 2018 season, what he did and his play calling ability. I was like, this is great. I love the guy's character. I'm all about it. Obviously, that didn't pan out. Lots of hectic times in Cleveland last year, but nonetheless, I think finally we might be moving in the right direction.
Yeah, certainly you could see why he's an effective running backs coach and maybe as a coordinator, but not really as a head honcho. Ali, news today, Browns running back Kareem Hunt has signed a 2-year extension with the team. Just kind of curious on your initial thoughts on today's news.
Today I was a little bit surprised to see it. I kind of knew going into this offseason that the Browns were going to be excited to sign Kareem Hunt to a larger contract, to extend him, to keep him in Cleveland, because I think they love what they have in that running back room. Of course, they bring Dearness Johnson back. You've got, of course, Nick Chubb, the man, the myth, the legend, and Nick Chubb, and Kareem Hunt, who we didn't really get to see play out to his fullest ability last year. So I think if you're Stump Mitchell, the running backs coach there, you're excited. Browns fans should be excited because we don't really know what we're going to see from the Browns backfield this year. Is it going to be a 50-50 split? Is it going to be a 40-60? We don't really know, but I think Kevin Stefanski, Stump Mitchell, Alex Van Pelt, all working in the same direction to really get the most out of course, Baker Mayfield, and of course, the backfield there.
And you look at it from a big picture standpoint too. You're talking about next year's free agency class with running backs is going to be stacked. Two guys that immediately come to mind. One would be James Conner of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He'll be a free agent. Also, Minnesota Vikings running back Dalvin Cook. So good for Hunt to be able to get his money now in what's going to be a really, really potent free agent class in terms of running backs.
And not just get his money now, but get his stability now. I think last year was almost a prove it kind of year, prove your character, prove that you've got the talent. Of course, we all know he does have that talent. This year is going to be kind of make or break for him. Hey, go out there, prove what you're worth. You've got, a scheme that's really going to benefit you here in Cleveland, and get that stability out from under you. Build that foundation, Kareem. Of course, you had that incident that happened in Kansas City, which is why he obviously came to Cleveland, but build a foundation, Kareem. Of course, us Browns fans, we're excited to have him. We're really looking forward to it, but you just really wish the best for the guy.
And if Hunt can get back into the swing of things with what he was able to do in Kansas City in terms of his on-field production, it's part of the reason why I don't think Nick Chubb will win the rushing title this season is if Kareem Hunt gets in rhythm, you have two of the premier running backs in the NFL in your backfield. So as good as Nick Chubb was a season ago, and with the upgrades that the Browns made on the offensive line, adding Jedrick Wills in the draft, and then Jack Conklin, the right tackle from the Titans, the guy who helped Derrick Henry and paved the way for Derrick Henry to the rushing title a season ago. I think the Browns really have a lot of different offensive weapons. And if they can get both Chubb and Hunt going in the backfield, you really, you're going to ride the hot hand. But I'm really excited to see what these two guys can do headed into the 2020 season.
And I'll tell you this too, they bring two totally different skill sets to the field, right? And don't forget, Mark, you just go out and you trade for fullback Andy Janovich. So that's also going to pave the way for both of these guys to have an outstanding season. But if you take a look at the skill set of Kareem Hunt, who can kind of be a little bit more dynamic, can catch the ball out of the backfield. And then, of course, Nick Chubb, he's your bell cow. He's your every down back kind of guy. He's your workhorse. But then you can slide Kareem Hunt into the slot. You can have him be a little bit more dynamic. But like you said, you get one of those guys going and watch out. You could have something really, really special here in Cleveland.
And I'd imagine that both of these guys are going to be the best friend of Baker Mayfield. Mayfield headed into year 3. Ali, I wanted to ask you, what do you think he needs to do this season to ensure that he's the Browns quarterback beyond 2020?
You gotta make some completions, buddy boy. You've got to go out there. You got to cut the interceptions. And I think the scheme last year, and of course the coaching staff, did not do Baker any favors. I'm the kind of person, I like Baker Mayfield. I like what he brings to the table. Did he have a bad year? Yeah, no question about it. But I think the Kevin Stefanski offense, developing having the marriage between the pass and the run, being multiple, as Kevin Stefanski likes to say, and having that play action wide zone type of set. That's really exactly what Baker Mayfield kind of thrives in. So I think it's really sink or swim for Baker. But to be successful, you've got to cut the turnovers. You have to. If you don't do that, I think the Browns are looking for another option as they go into the 2021 season. But you can't turn the ball over, Baker.
I noticed he didn't quite do as many progressive commercials this offseason either.
No, I think from the Browns as a whole, if you look at last year going into the season, they were kind of the bell of the ball. Everybody was on the Browns hype train and everybody got burnt. And that's what I just like to say. Welcome to being a Browns fan. You get burnt sometimes. But this year, everybody's laying a little bit low, including Baker. You're not hearing a lot out of him. Just the only news that really came out was he had Camp Baker down in Austin, where he had Njoku and Austin Hooper and Hollywood Higgins all come, and they were throwing and getting some reps in during really the peak of the coronavirus. So I think you're hearing nothing but positives right now, and I think that's really important for Baker. He's got that chip back on his shoulder, and that's really where he thrives, is when he's got his back up against the wall and he's got to prove it.
And you could see he put on weight last season. It's something he's admitted to media members this offseason in an effort to try to stay healthy, because there were times he was running for his life a season ago, sacked 40 times, the 9th most of any quarterback in the NFL. And certainly you can see why the Browns wanted to make upgrades on this offensive line compared to a season ago, where it really wouldn't have mattered who you put back there, just because if he doesn't have that much time to throw, it's hard to get that timing down with any of your offensive skill position players. And so he comes into camp this season in good shape, and you can see why, because of how critical this third year is, in the sense that he's only under contract with the Browns for 2 more seasons under his rookie deal. And so we'll see what happens moving forward with Baker Mayfield.
It's really going to be interesting. I think last year he had to have a little bit of weight on him. He was running around like a crazy person, scrambling for his life, taking those big hits. But this year it's going to be a little bit different. Like you brought up, they make those additions on the offensive line. Of course, you're getting J.C. Treader back, hopefully for week 1. If not, you've got Nick Harris there at the center position. Stability with Joel Bitonio, Jedrick Wills. He's got a little bit of a learning curve there. But Jack Conklin to really solidify that offensive line, which was not the case last year. Not the case at all. It was hot garbage, and it just really didn't benefit Baker, didn't benefit anybody, didn't benefit this offense. So I think for the first time, you've got that, and you've got stability, and you've got a scheme that really is going to benefit your quarterback in Cleveland.
On the offensive side of the ball, Ali, is there an addition that the Browns made this offseason, whether through the draft or through free agency, that you're really excited about for the Browns?
This is not a sexy pick at all. You're gonna laugh at this one, but I'm so excited that they brought in that fullback Andy Janovich.
Okay.
I know that's probably a silly answer, but I am so excited to have him, because I love the running game. I love what Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb bring to the table, like we just discussed. But I think if you can put, along with those two premier tackles, Jedrick Wills, who's got a lot of talent, and Jack Conklin, who kind of solidifies that right side of the offensive line. And then you bring a fullback in there. Whew, watch out, guys. You might have some fireworks going on in the backfield there on the offensive side of the ball.
No love for two-time Pro Bowler Austin Hooper, who comes
Hey,
over
don't
from the
get me wrong.
Saints.
I love Austin Hooper. He has had a tremendous. I love this tight end room specifically. I'm so excited because Kevin Stefanski loves to run those heavy formations. You get you get Austin Hooper out there. You even throw Harrison Bryant out there, but then you've got Andy Janovich. Oh goodness, you got some power there.
I'm excited for the cryptic Instagram posts from David Njoku, though, just because now it appears that Harrison Bryant has surpassed him in the depth chart, too. So I know he had the trade request earlier this offseason, and you're hearing things from Drew Rosenhaus and everything, too. I've got my popcorn because at least this offseason, that's been one of the most entertaining things that I've seen from a Brown standpoint. And really, one of the only things where they've had some instability, which has not been the case with this franchise in the past.
Really good point. It's going to be really, really interesting to see what they do in that tight end room with David Njoku and what kind of role he brings to the table. Because like you said, Harrison Bryant just surpassed him on the depth chart. And that's what happens, as we saw in Hard Knocks a couple of years ago. His punishment was to go to the jugs machine. Sorry, you have to get better, David. But, like the running backs, you've got two completely different skill sets. But if you take a look at the tight ends, all completely different skill sets. You've got Austin Hooper that can really work the middle of the field, be that security blanket for Baker, which we all know he loves to have. He goes back to his time in Oklahoma with Mark Andrews. Even in 2018, he had David Njoku, who was really, really good that year. Last year, he didn't have that security blanket in the middle of the field. He had Jarvis that could work the seam, but that was really about it. This year, you take a look at Austin Hooper, who can be that power. He can block, he can run, he can catch, kind of that overall prototypical tight end. But then you also bring Harrison Bryant in, who's an incredible route runner, almost a big-bodied wide receiver. But then if you bring David Njoku into the mix, who I still really like, and I think he's got a ton of potential, he's kind of that 50-50 go up and kind of get it basketball type of player. So explosive, athletic, not as reliable, but all different skill sets. So it's going to be really interesting in the middle of the field this year.
I know Lane Kiffin, the former coach at FAU, now the head coach at Ole Miss, was really high on Harrison Bryant. Yeah. Obviously, any college coach is going to heap praises of his players, but I know this was a guy that the Browns get in the middle of the draft that they're really excited about. And now I know they flirted with trading Njoku in the past, and really who knows what they could get in exchange for Njoku. I think that's really the bigger thing with him if you were to make a move there. But we know with head coach Kevin Stefanski in his first year as head coach of the Browns, we know a season ago his propensity for using multiple tight end sets. So maybe he'll find a way to get all these guys in the mix.
It could seriously happen. And if you even take a look at the wide receiver room, I know there's a lot of question marks. Who's going to be wide receiver 3? Who's going to be that guy? Whether that's Hollywood Higgins, of course, they let go Damian Ratley and Taywan Taylor, Donovan Peoples-Jones that can step up into that position. But at the end of the day, with the formations that Kevin Stefanski likes to run, you may not need that guy right now. You can put a lot of emphasis on the tight ends, put a lot of emphasis on the run game, and then have Odell and Jarvis just work in the middle there.
I feel like with Donovan Peoples-Jones coming from Michigan, it's almost like the complete Benedict Arnold scenario, coming from Michigan and then playing for an Ohio team in the Cleveland Browns.
I'm really excited. I am an Ohio State fan. I'll put that out there. I no longer live in Ohio. I'm in South Carolina now, but I grew up a Buckeye fan. But I love college football. I love watching the draft and watching these guys become professionals. The one thing I can say about Donovan Peoples-Jones is the kid can ball. He's got a ton of talent. Of course, they didn't, Josh Gaddis in Michigan didn't use his skill set properly. They didn't have a great quarterback in Michigan in that system. But I think if you take a look at him and what he's done in training camp, he's head and shoulders above a lot of these other guys. And I did hear Nathan Zagura joked about, if you would tell me that Donovan Peoples-Jones are first round selection, I wouldn't even be shocked because that's what he looks like in training camp. So I think as we go into the season, he's definitely going to play a role in special teams. I think Mike Prefer's really going to be excited to have a guy like that. But I also think that he may be able to solidify himself a spot right there in the wide receiver 3, maybe 4 position.
So do you think Higgins takes that spot early on then, or?
Well, I think that they bring two totally different things to the table. And it really depends. I think in week 1 and week 2, they're going to put a lot of emphasis on running the football and utilizing the tight ends. Of course, they're going to use Jarvis and Odell. But I really think that Hollywood Higgins is going to be more of the guy if somebody like a Jarvis goes down, God forbid, rather than having, Odell, Jarvis, and then Hollywood on the other side. I think that's more of a role for somebody like a Donovan Peoples-Jones. I think that Rashard Higgins is more of that slot type of receiver, really, than having that wide receiver 3 selection.
And a lot of Browns fans know that both Landry and Beckham coming back from their respective offseason surgeries as well. I kind of want to go back to Kevin Stefanski using multiple tight ends. He did that on 57%
Right.
of the Minnesota Vikings offensive play calls when he was Minnesota's OC a year ago. And so, again, that's why I think you could see all three of those guys, Austin Hooper, David Njoku, and Harrison Bryant, get into the mix there just because we know he's done that in the past. And then also, the Vikings ran the ball third most of any team in the NFL. The only two teams that ran it more were the Ravens, who had the most rushing yards of any team in NFL history, and the San Francisco 49ers. And so you saw that all three of those teams, too, had a great amount of success. All three of those teams were playoff teams a season ago.
Like I said, I think this scheme fits this roster perfectly. But if you take a look at Minnesota a year ago, take a look at their running game. Yeah, they had Dalvin Cook, who is elite. I love what he brings to the table, but they didn't have two. They didn't have two elite running backs. Their tight end room was okay, but I would definitely put Cleveland's roster up against theirs last year, and same with the wide receiver group. I think this talent is significantly better than what they had in Minnesota last year. So I'm seeing, it might just transition. You might just see some success in this offense. You might not see it until week 3 and 4, just given the lack of padded practices and preseason and everything in the implementation process. But really, as we get into the season, I think that this is definitely going to work in their favor.
Ali, I want to go back to something you said a little bit earlier, and hang on, I lost my trail of thought. Give me just a second. I lost my spot in my document. Actually, let's go here. Entering Sunday's game, the Browns enter as an 8.5-point underdog to the Ravens. Other than the obvious of trying to slow down Lamar Jackson, what do you think the keys to the games are for the Browns?
Make them run it. I think, of course, they've got such a great run game. Lamar Jackson, J.K. Dobbins, Mark Ingram, but make them do that. I think if they're out there slinging the ball, here's what I think. If you take a look at training camps as a whole, in the NFL at this point, everybody's kind of at a disadvantage. They didn't have the preseason. They didn't have OTAs, rookie mini camps. Everybody's at a little bit of a disadvantage here. But get them off of their script. Don't let them come out there with a significant game plan to really let Hollywood Brown take the top off. Because I think at this point, we don't know the status of Greedy Williams. But I put a little bit more emphasis on our front seven right now than I would on our secondary with the loss of Grant Delpit. I do really like, Ronnie Harrison that we just got from Jacksonville, but this is his first week in the system. So until he's a little bit more comfortable, until we really have some guys that are, meant to be in those roles, get some of those guys back, I think let's really put the emphasis here on that front seven, get after Lamar, get after the running backs, and get them off their game plan and make them run the football.
I'll run a few things by you here, and feel free to hop in at any point. I think the Ravens are going to have a bit of regression this year compared to a season ago. Future Hall of Fame offensive lineman Marshall Yanda retired.
Yeah.
Center Matt Skura is coming off a knee injury, too, that ended his season last year. And since the restructuring of the league in 2002, the AFC North, which is made up of the Browns, Steelers, Ravens, and Bengals, no team has won the division 3 consecutive years, which is what the Ravens are trying to do this year. For me, I think the big thing is trying to make Lamar Jackson throw outside of the numbers. So these run-heavy packages and getting the ball to his tight ends like Mark Andrews, what have you, and being able to have tighter formations and run the ball down teams' throats. teams are going to be able to game plan for that because it's not going to be so new and so exotic like it was a season ago. And so for some of those things, there's no way that the Ravens have the most rushing yards in NFL history. It's not like they're going to break their record that they did a season ago. There's no chance that that happens because teams are going to be able to adjust their game plans based on the tape from a season ago.
Yeah, I agree with that. And if you take a look at what the Browns did up against the Ravens twice last year, I think that the front seven really did well. And you take out, like you said, Hall of Famer, on the offensive line, and you've got a couple injuries there. It's not going to be what it was. I do think that they make a couple steps back. Don't get me wrong. I think they're one of the most talented teams in the league. And of course, they've got the reigning MVP in Lamar Jackson, and they just got a lot better than they were last year. But with the injuries, with everything that's going into this season, I can see it. I can see him taking a little bit of a step back.
I remembered what I wanted to go back to earlier. You were mentioning how the Browns were the sexy team a season ago, and that was for good reason too, because at this time last season, in August 2019, the Browns were the favorite to win the AFC North by odds makers in Las Vegas, and you
Wild.
never bet against the house. And so going into last season, there was so much hype, not quite as much this season, but you look at the offseason that the Browns were able to put together. Look, it's like, for me, it's like now or never, because you're talking about the longest active playoff drought in the NFL. Last time the Browns made the playoffs was 2002. You're talking about 12 consecutive losing seasons. The only team in North American professional sports with a longer active playoff drought, Major League Baseball's Seattle Mariners, last made the playoffs in 2001. And so, Ali, I've got to ask you, what constitutes a successful 2020 season for the Browns?
Oh gosh, I think it just starts and ends with one, it has to look right. I think that was the biggest thing with last year. You had all this talent and everything just wasn't going according to plan. Yeah, you were winning some games, but it just didn't quite look right. So I think this year, even if you do go 8-8, you don't have that 10-6 type of season that everybody so desperately wants to have. It has to gel. It just has to look like it's supposed to. Of course, I think we can all, as fans, be a little bit more understanding as we go into the season, the first couple of weeks, that it's not going to quite be what we all thought it was going to be, just given the circumstances. But towards the middle of the season, I think in order to be considered successful, one, you have to win, right? Let's have a winning season for the first time in what feels like forever. And two, it just has to look right. It has to look like it belongs. Odell has to be Odell. Baker has to be Baker. We can rely on Nick Chubb being Nick Chubb because I think he's just got that talent no matter the scheme. But the offensive line has to play. And I think that the defense will fall. I really liked the defense last year. I liked them a year ago. I think that they've got the pieces. They're just waiting on that scheme. But the offense just has to look right.
From a defensive standpoint, to me, the linebacking core and secondary is probably the weak links of this team, because the linebacking core, you've got a lot of young players. You mentioned the Delpit injury earlier. Of course, up front, if the Browns can get after the quarterback with Myles Garrett coming back from his suspension, if we can get some production out of guys like a Sheldon Richardson or a Olivier Vernon as well, if they can get some pressure on the quarterback, it makes those the guys on the back end, their job's a lot easier. And so that's something I have my eye on too with the Delpit injury. It's really unfortunate. I was really excited to see him play, just because you talk about a guy who could have been a first round talent. He was playing hurt a season ago at LSU when they went 15-0 en route to a national championship. And he still won the Jim Thorpe Award as a member of the LSU Tigers. And so he's not going to play this season for the Browns, which is really unfortunate. But I'm really curious to see on how the linebacking core looks. And then from the secondary standpoint, obviously Denzel Ward, if he can, prove why he was a first round draft pick just a couple of years ago, that will be huge. But who are those other guys that emerge in those position groups?
Well, and I think if you go back a couple of weeks, of course, Mac Wilson going down did not help that defense at all whatsoever. I think we were all anticipating him to have, that breakout type of season. He was really having a great training camp, a good off season. And we were really looking forward to that middle of the defense there in the linebacking room. Of course, you lose Joe Schobert, and you, of course, lose Kirko, So I think there was a lot of emphasis on what Mack Wilson could bring to the table. But keep an eye out for Sione Takitaki. He's stepping up to the plate. Of course, he was drafted to be that Mike linebacker. He's taking some will reps, but keep an eye on him. B.J. Goodson's a great rotational player. Tay Davis there. It's really going to be an interesting spot with that linebacking room. But if you take a look at the front four, I think you're really in a good spot there. You've got Miles, you've got Olivier, but taking a look at the interior of the defensive line, whether that's Jordan Elliott, who's been great so far in camp. He's got an explosive first step. I really like what he does. And then, of course, Larry Ogunjobi, who I think is going to have a breakout season as he goes into a contract type of year. And, of course, Sheldon Richardson. But, yes, completely agree. The secondary is kind of the weak link. You don't know. A lot of these guys are a little bit on the younger side. Of course, you've got Andrew Sandejo, Carl Joseph back there that can provide a little bit of veteran leadership, but just a lot of injuries and a lot of question marks. But I think if the front seven can get after it, it's going to allow the secondary to really lock down as well.
Elliott and Richardson are my guys from Mizzou. I'm a University of Missouri alum, so I'm very familiar with both players, at least dominating at a college level, and we'll see if they can do that for the Browns in 2020. But you're talking about a Browns team, 12 consecutive losing seasons, and Ali, I think you're spot on in terms of it looking right, just because the Browns just need some stability. And I think that's where Kevin Stefanski as a hire, he might not be the flashiest name in the world, but you're talking about a franchise that's on its 12th different head coach and 10th different general manager in Andrew Berry in the past 22 seasons. And so you look at the most successful franchises in the league, they have stability at the general manager, head coach, and quarterback position. If the Browns can get those three right and then just fill in the rest of the pieces, that's how you're going to compete against Baltimore and Pittsburgh year in and year out. We'll see what Cincinnati does. I think Cincinnati's still a ways out, but we'll see. I mean, this is a very, very competitive division headed into the season.
I think if you take a look at the division alone, you're looking at one of the best divisions in football right now. And I think you hit the nail on the head. It's stability. And it starts with alignment. And I get joked at on my show, on the Here We Go Brownies podcast. I say alignment constantly, but for the first time in what seems like forever, you've got everybody working towards the same goal. Ownership, the front office, the head coach, and all the players are bought into this. So I think you have to have alignment. You have to have stability. Might not be the sexiest thing in the world, but at the end of the day, as long as it looks right, that's really all that matters.
So I've got to ask you, Browns are an 8.5-point underdog to the Ravens. I like the Browns to cover. I don't think that they'll win, though. What's your prediction for Sunday's game?
Gosh, you know what? I've got to agree with you. I think if you take a look at the schedule, the first 3 weeks, of course, you've got Baltimore. I don't think they get a win there because it's at Baltimore. I do think they cover, but I think that maybe, maybe 4 points. I think they get us by 4 or so. But if you take a look at that, you lose week 1, then you've got Washington and Cincinnati. You can really go into Dallas, being 2-1. I think that's you're sitting pretty at that point.
And people might be like, Mark, are you crazy? How could the Browns beat the Ravens? Remember, this is a Browns team that split that series a season ago, and a lot of people forget about that.
Yeah, it's true. And if you go back in 2019, when the Browns beat Baltimore, they looked right. That was the one game where it just looked the way it should. The offense was doing its thing, but you had Joe Schobert that was stopping Lamar Jackson. The defense was just killing it out there. And for the first time in 2019, it looked right.
I've also got to ask you too, outside of the Browns-Ravens game, is there an opening weekend matchup that you're psyched to watch this weekend? Obviously, Thursday night, you've got the defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs hosting the Houston Texans, a team they knocked out of the playoffs a season ago. That's probably the one I have my eye on. Is there another opening week matchup that you're really excited to watch this weekend?
Well, it doesn't make for very good podcasting if I agree with you, but I do have to tell you that's the one that I've had circled on my calendar. And the reason being, of course, you want to go out and see, the Super Bowl champs going up against Deshaun Watson, who just signed a huge extension down in Houston. And of course they get rid of DeAndre Hopkins, who also just signed an extension in Arizona. Lots of moving parts for the Houston Texans this offseason. So I'm really excited to see them put it all together. Of course, I'm excited to see what Kansas City is going to do. But that's been who I've had circled on the calendar. I know that's probably a bad answer because we're agreeing on this one, but I'm just so excited to see what they can do this year. I'm really excited to see the running back Clyde Edwards-Helaire out of LSU work in that system. Of course, you've got Pat Mahomes, who's incredibly talented, but to see him actually have a running back, I'm really excited to see that pan out.
And remember, Damian Williams, who some believe thought should have won Super Bowl MVP, has opted out of the season as well.
Right.
So Edwards-Helaire is going to get the vast majority of the touches for Kansas City. And I'm really excited to see how Andy Reid utilizes his new gadget in the backfield, just because that offense is so potent with Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce and Sammy Watkins as well. And so he's got a new running back. We've seen what Andy Reid has done in the past with other skilled running backs, kind of a lot like Brian Westbrook for the Eagles back in the day. That's kind of the impact and kind of the way I think the Chiefs could use Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the 2020 season as a rookie as well. And so I'm just so psyched sports are back, because it was so dismal for like weeks and weeks and weeks. And so obviously for me, the NFL and college football are going to take precedent, but you also have, the NBA and the NHL and Major League Baseball starting to enter the postseason. It's a really exciting time.
It's so exciting. And for it's been such a sad 2020 so far, and sports is what brings joy to so many people. It's such a unification. We can finally have that as the country's so divided right now with politics and coronavirus and everything that's going on. We finally have that unifier in sports where we can all put it to the side and come together and watch a football game. I'm so excited.
And it all gets underway on Thursday night. The Chiefs open as a 10-point favorite over the Texans, and we'll see if they can be the first team since the Patriots in the mid-2000s to repeat as Super Bowl champions. In week one, we'll see what they do against the Houston Texans. Ali, any final thoughts before I let you go here?
No, I just want to thank you for having me on. This is great. Like I said, anytime I can get on and talk a little bit of football is definitely a win for me. It's what I love to do. But thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Check out Ali Hysong. Again, she is the host of the Here We Go Brownies podcast. Ali, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. For Ali Hysong, I'm Mark Bergin. Thank you for listening to the Browns Nation station. Go give us a 5-star review. Please rate, review, and subscribe. We'll be back with a live reaction after the Browns-Ravens game on Sunday, so be sure to tune in there. And until then, take care. And so long, everyone.